Buenas tardes, boa tarde, and good afternoon to everyone in attendance today. Welcome to our Global Perspectives on Race and Racism speaker series. My name is Dr. Jaira J. Harrington, Assistant Professor in the Black Studies Department at UIC. I will serve as moderator for today's talk, Favelas Diary, Black Women Telling Their Own Stories and Creating Their Own Narratives by Professor Thayná Soares. Here's the rundown of today's schedule. First, I will provide some background about the series. Second, I will introduce our speaker. She will share her presentation. And last, we will have open Q&A where comments in the chat will be acknowledged, and you can also raise your hand so that you can dialogue with our guests, and then we will close for the afternoon. Before we begin, I would like to offer some background about the series. With the support from programming committees in the departments of Latin American and Latino Studies, Sociology, Global Asian Studies, and Gender and Women's Studies, the Department of Black Studies is hosting the Global Perspectives on Race and Racism speaker series for fall 2023. This interdisciplinary series features scholars with expertise across the world to address the global socio-historical, economic, and systemic effects of racism. These events will provide multiple perspectives through which participants can explore the global dynamics of racism. We will see that the phenomena of race not only intersect with citizenship, belonging, and constructs of the nation state, they also commingle with class, gender, sexuality, and ability. This series will highlight race and racism from a variety of disciplinary perspectives and geographic contexts. Today's speaker is Thayná Soares. Professor Soares is a multilingual scholar and professional translator. She holds a master's degree in ethnic relations from Centro Federal de Educação Tecnológica, Celso, Suckow da Fonseca, and her studies were funded by a prestigious Coordination for the Improvement of Higher Education Personnel, CEFET Scholarship. Soares completed her degree in Portuguese and Spanish language in literature at Universidade Federal Rural do Rio de Janeiro, and Soares' thesis titled Negras Desnudas y Crudas, Race, Gender, and Translations Constructions on Black Women's Bodies explores the themes of North-South translation, poetry slams, and how Black women's words are being translated. Soares' ongoing research involves the aspects of an intersectional and activist translation of Black women's voices in writing. The floor is yours, Professor Soares, and we look forward to your presentation.
Hello, good afternoon. Everyone. My name is Thayná Soares, as Professor Harrington just said. And I would like to thank Professor Harrington and also the Department of Black Studies. I'm very glad to be here today. And I'm thankful for everybody that came to this lecture too. So the title the title of my presentation is Favelas Diary, Black Women Telling Their Own Stories and Creating Their Own Narratives. And next slide, please. So we have the roadmap for this talk, and we are going to see the stories of two Black women that had the courage to speak about themselves and their difficult realities. Firstly, we reflect about Brazilian background and your impressions of Brazil. And then we are going to, I'll give an overview of Carolina Maria de Jesus and Rosemary Mendonça. We are also going to analyze how races and gender races are reverberated in those Black women's lives. And we are going to think about the importance of perspective and listening to different stories. So before we start this talk, I would like to give you some of my own background and my personal history. And I'm a Brazilian Black woman from Sargento Mucali, Belfort Roxo, Rio de Janeiro, which is a peripheral area from peripheral neighborhood from Rio de Janeiro. And I also would like to highlight the importance of literature in my life, and also reading and writing, that all these tools helped me to escape from reality when it was too hard to sustain, because living in the place I live sometimes gets really difficult. And also, I need to say that some things that we are going to bring here are sensitive and maybe hurtful for some people. And I want you to feel free to participate in the way is more comfortable to you, okay? And this is my email, I'll repeat later. Let's think, as I said, about the Brazilian background. And what comes up to your mind when you think about Brazil and about favelas? Have you ever watched City of God, City of Man, or Elite Squad? And the main questions here for me, let's reflect a little bit about it, because of these movies. I don't know if you can chat if you saw the movies or not. Okay, so okay. Okay, nice. Some of you, oh, okay. Some of you may not have seen all these movies, but they are very male-centered, and we don't see the Black women perspectives inside of those narratives. And they also are very stereotyped too, because some of them are not made by people who live in favelas. And today we are going to go in a different direction, because we are putting Black women in the center of this talk and of the narrative. So starting of our base literature that is all composed by Black women, we are going to talk about Lélia Gonzalez, that developed the concept of triple discrimination. And she's going to say that Black poor women from Brazil suffer from different realities and different types of prejudice because of these triple conditions. And also Portuguese, that she attests that Brazilian Portuguese is made by African people and their influence in our history in Brazil. And also Patricia Hill Collins with the Black feminist epistemology to expose the importance of Black women experiences and points of view, and also how our lived experience reflect in society. And the next one, the last one, is Nua Piedade. She reports that the feminist movement is based on sorority, and different from that, the ties that enlace Black women are shaped by pain. And dor in Brazilian Portuguese means pain. So she makes this game with the language. So she puts in the place of sorority is dororidade. Okay, my voice is very different in Portuguese and English. Okay, okay. Now let's think a little bit about the piece. Some of you probably saw the documentary and read some of the piece of Carolina Maria de Jesus. And Good Morning Rocinha is made by United Nations Earth Summit and is directed by Bruno Sorrentino. And this documentary tells the story of Rosemary Mendonça, and reports the violence and inequalities of the daily life of Rocinha. And Child of the Dark is a book written by Carolina Maria de Jesus, and its first translation was in 1963. And in Brazil, it was published in the 3 years before then in English. So it shows the huge success and international success that Carolina made, because when you talk about Black women translation, these tend to have so much more time to that they are translated. And in the case of a Brazilian Portuguese piece, it is even harder, and a lot of our work, like Lélia Gonzalez, was not even translated. So also, Child of the Dark states the reality of Carolina Maria de Jesus, her children, her neighbors, and Favela do Canindé. Let's keep all these themes in mind and the theory that I present for you to think about these pictures that I brought. These are the places that are the where these narratives happens, and this is Rocinha in 1992, the time that it starts Good Morning Rocinha, and Favela do Canindé when Carolina Maria de Jesus lives there and wrote Child of the Dark. So besides these two narratives are from different periods and places of Brazil, they share a lot of commonalities. Which of these commonalities did you observe during the reading and watching the documentary? This intersection of race, gender, and class. What else? Yeah, they were both mothers. Yeah. Okay. Thinking about the triple discrimination that I brought for you, that developed by Lélia Gonzalez, I had some impressions about both of these narratives. Would you please go to the next slide? Oh, sorry. Oh, I forgot something. Okay, I'll present both of them. I forgot. So Rosemary Mendonça was born in 1992, and she was born in Rocinha, Rio de Janeiro, and she is Gustavo's mother. And this is very important, as Professor Harrington just said. And this is something that she's very proud of during the narrative. And also she works as a cleaner and is a housewife. And she lived her whole life in Rocinha, but dreaming of going to Paraíba. And Carolina Maria de Jesus, born in 1914 and died in 1977. She was born in Sacramento, Minas Gerais. A lot of people think she was born in São Paulo, but she moved to São Paulo in 1948. And she is Berenice José Carlo and João José's mom. She moved from the favela, from Favela do Canindé, when her book Quarto de Despejo, Child of the Dark, became famous. But then she was poor in the end of her life. And she worked as a paper collector after being a domestic worker. Okay, so which themes did you perceive during this this reading and watching the documentary? Extreme poverty, state neglect, yeah. Don't be shy. Corruption, yes. Gender violence, lack of access to formal education, yeah. Okay, so I'll bring the main themes that I perceived in both of state violence too. Yeah, I'll bring the main themes uh, that I perceived from both of the narratives that are Brazilian politics, education, motherhood, hunger, and inequalities. All of these themes um, are influenced by triple discrimination that Lele Gonzalez talked about in the 80s. Could you go to the next one, please? Okay. In which situations are these themes perceived? Now, let's go back to the, so they can see the themes that I perceived. You said something about poverty, that it can be about inequality and hunger too. Professor Harrington said that they are both mothers, and that is inside of motherhood too. Brazil, I couldn't read, sorry. But they seen that the kids are talking about police killing people. And yeah, that's something that can relate to inequalities and Brazilian politics too, and state force. So to make us reflect a little bit, I brought some examples and some quotes. The millions of dollars going to the Olympics here. Oh my God. Let me bring the chat. The millions of dollars going to the Olympics in Rio shows how the states choose not to invest in families. True. And we have two pictures of Rosemary when she's a baby, when she starts the documentary, and Carolina Maria de Jesus. And let's go to the next slide so we can see some quotes about these teams. So about Brazilian politics, I brought this Carolina asking herself, asking the sky about if is there another nations in the sky, and she says, I wonder if favela exists there in the sky, and if up there a favela does exist, can it be that when I die, I'm going to live in the favela? And Rosemary, as someone said in the chat about the Olympics, the World Cup's coming and the Olympics games. The government is spending millions and millions. I ask you, do you see any change in your lives? Think about it. And Rosemary says, I know nothing about the World Cup, and I don't feel pride to be Brazilian. I don't see anything in it. What does it mean? So sometimes we are worried about our survivors, and we really don't care if Brazil is the soccer country. And some impressions that are international sometimes are not perceived, are not important for a lot of people that are in this kinds of environments. Let's see now, education. Carolina receives a visit from Senhor João, and he wanted to know what I was writing. I replied, it was my diary. And so Senhor João says, I never saw a Black who liked book as much as you do. And Carolina writes, everyone has an ideal in life. Mine is to love reading. And Rosemary, she's going to say that she made a mistake by having another child. You know that she had miscarried. And she says, I did nothing at school. I just messed around. I only wanted to play. The teachers were sick of me, so I got kicked out. And later we're going to see some data about Brazil and education and the inequality, because a lot of teachers don't have a lot of patience with Black kids. And this is the story of Rosemary. Okay, we go to motherhood. Okay, about motherhood, I brought these two small texts that Carolina is talking about how Berenice hates not having a shoe to wear, and she's observing her child, and she says, I stood watching my daughters smile because I myself don't know how to smile. And Rosemary, the only thing that makes me happy is Gustavo. And I know I'm difficult. I try to change sometimes, but I've been through so much, I just can't. To laugh and joke around, that's not me. I'm just not the person I was. So all the challenge that they face, and that's because they are Black poor women, as said by Lélia Gonzalez, made them to change. If you remember Rosemary, when she was a child, she was very happy and she was very joyful, and she would play in Rocinha, and with the abuse and all that she had been through, she just started being this different person, this difficult person that, as she said. Also about motherhood, that is a very important theme, a fundamental theme in those narratives, and about being a single mother, Carolina Maria de Jesus will say, I reflect, I've got to be tolerant with my children. They don't have anyone in the world but me. How sad is the condition of a woman alone without a man at home? And Rosemary, when she's a child, she attests, my father should be buying food for us. He should respect my mom too. So we have different levels here in Brazil. The main responsible of a child is the mother in general, and a lot of fathers does not show up for their children, and it's the case of both of them. So also about hunger and inequalities, Carolina will say, I wonder if God is going to have pity on me. I wonder if I will get any money today. I wonder if God knows that favela exists and that the favelados are hungry. And Rosemary, as a child, will say, I want a swimming pool. Please, God, let me have a swimming pool. When I move down from the favela, I want a job in the house. I want to be a cleaner. So both of them have this feeling and this, they want to move from the favelas because of the inequality that they face, and Carolina because of hunger too. So there are a lot of other things that we could bring here and that we are going to discuss later, but these narratives bring so much to discussion, and they are so important to understand the history of Brazil, and also the stories that Black women have to face here. And another things that I perceived are abuse, drug traffic and violence, self-awareness in the case of Rosemary, and self-acceptance in the case of Carolina, and also love for literature and writing. That is the case of Carolina. So some data that I told you before. This is Cedra, the important platform in Brazil that is new, because they cross the data. It's not only about Black people, they talk about Black women, they talk about Black men. So this is very important in Brazil because we sometimes don't have this type of data information. So Black women are the most unemployed group in Brazil, as you can see in the first picture. And Black women are also less alphabetized than white women. I'm sorry for this mistake in this slide. And so white women are represent 5.8%, and of they are and of the non-alphabetized people, and Black women are 18.3. Next, please. And also, sometimes in Brazil, people say that the problem is not race, but class. And in this case, CEDRA does discuss only about peripheral areas. And we see that even in these areas like favelas or a neighborhood like mine, Black women also have less access to higher education. So in these two different realities, we see a lot of commonalities. And I'm talking here about a Black motherhood, something that a lot of Black women in Brazil have to face. And Portuguese, both of them, if you read the pieces in Portuguese, you're going to perceive that something that it's seen as grammarly incorrect is from Lélia Gonzalez, and I also believe in that we are talking about Portuguese that is a mix of Black and Portuguese. And also dororidade, that in both of these stories, we can see a lot of pain, a lot of difficult situations, and the commonalities that we see in both stories is because of dororidade. And also the state force throughout history, that they don't do a lot for favelados and for Black women in general. So we have the 60s, and then we have 2015, the last period of the documentary, and we see that a lot is the same. So, and also, oh, sorry, the last one was missing. How their voices are a way to report inequalities. And they had this courage to talk, to speak about abuse, to speak about the government. And this is something that I'm really proud to, and that really made me cry sometimes. And it's something that a lot of Black women do in Brazil, and this helps us to be a more equal place. And does somebody want to read these quotes that I brought? Thank you, Julissa. She's raising.
A small girl and her mother passed a statue depicting a European man who had barehandedly subdued a ferocious lion. The little girl stopped, looked puzzled, and asked, "Mama, there's something wrong with that statue. Everybody knows that a man can't whip a lion." "But darling," her mother replied, "you must remember that the man made the statue," as told by Katie G. Cannon.
Thank you so much. So I want to hear you. What do you think about this quote? Why do you think that I brought this quote for this presentation? Haley?
I was gonna say that you were trying to like emphasize circumstance, I guess you could say, if you get what I'm saying. Because it is unrealistic for, a man to be able to whip a lion, but it depends on, the circumstance in which it's happening and like, how and why and like it says at the end that the man made the statue. So
Thank you. Anybody else wants to share?
Now, when I looked at this myself and got to the end when it says you must remember that the man made the statue, is that man he wrote the history of what it is you're seeing, the depiction of controlling this narrative. Because, I liken this to parts of my history where there was no man, there was only a woman, but then the woman doesn't get written in, the man does.
Thank you. So, because it shows how media and representations are shaped by our own view of the world. And so when people in power create media, it is a reflection of their desires and privilege. And Haiti said, was it to demonstrate how European white men have the power or ability to do so. You are all correct. And also it is to relate with my previous start in this show that I said about the movies that we some of you saw, and in Brazil they are very important. And in this case, we need to pay attention to who's telling the story. In my case, I'm from the translation field. Who is translating? What is the intentions? What are the intentions of this person, of this company, and what do they want to with this documentary, with this book? And in the case of this talk, we made a different path. We brought the narratives of Black women, and they are telling their own stories. I'm not talking for them, and they are having the opportunity of showing their own perspective. These are my resources. I divide for the type. And next, please. Photos, books, and articles. And also, thank you. And the credits for these slides that are very, very beautiful. And my email there too, if you want to share later. But let's discuss and talk about both of these narratives and about my talk. I'm very glad to be here. I'm a little nervous, like always, but I'm very happy to share with you, and I'm thankful for all your thoughts that you shared with me.
Thank you so much, Thayná. Thank you so much for that thoughtful and important presentation, recentering Black women, making sure that we are centering their stories and narratives, and getting us to think about the kind of interlinks between these two prominent Black women who are figured prominently in these stories, both the documentary where we have the visual aspect of Rosemary's life and life story, and also the literature of Carolina Maria de Jesus. So I'd like to open it up for us to have a discussion. So the documentary itself, it sounded like some folks wanted to launch right in there. There's so much in both texts that we could talk about, but just some initial thoughts, comments, reflections, connections that you've made. We'd love to hear them. So please do share. Maybe I'll just get us started with a question that we can all reflect upon. So thinking about the kind of intersectional identities that are shared between both Rosemary and Carolina Maria de Jesus, these are both poor Black women that are single mothers, whose lives are steeped in the kind of challenges of living in a favela. And we see that figured very prominently. When it comes to this kind of story being centralized, what would you say, Thayná, and we can also get discussion from the audience, is this a frequent occurrence, centering the kind of stories and narratives around these kinds of Black women who have a unique experience within the broader Brazilian narrative that doesn't quite acknowledge their existence, but certainly the kind of political decisions that we see made around funding for a World Cup and Olympics, they are impacted by these kinds of policies that ignore them. So are there many narratives around Black women, particularly contemporary narratives that describe their experience through films, through series, do you see a lot of that?
Yeah, I do, but as a scholar, my view is a little different because I have contact with a lot of Black women that are from Black feminist movement in Brazil. So for me, I see a lot of that, but in my neighborhood, I don't see the same reality. Here, a lot of people don't. A lot of Black women don't know a lot about social question. They don't talk, but they know, because when you face this kind of situations, you certainly know. Sometimes you can't name each of the situations, but you certainly know. So I have this different view because I am from I'm in a lot of universities, and I am in the Forum of Black Women in Rio. So for me, it's a little different from the other reality that I know that exists.
Thank you. And so I was wanting to know as well a little bit more about representation in general. So when we see this documentary, it's, you know, telling a story, but do you see any other kinds of media that portray poor Black women in this very intimate way? Do you see that often? Or is this not very frequent?
Nowadays, we have a lot, because I think that Brazil is facing this new reality where everybody wants to talk about race and racism, and a lot of people are understanding that they are Black and how Blackness is important in their identity. And we also have Globe that right now, I sometimes I'm very surprised because I wake up, I turn on the TV, and I see a lot of Black people discussing and talking about races. And that's something that we didn't have in the past 10 years. You know, I'm only 25, so I really don't have a lot. But I know now from my research that things are definitely changing in Brazil. And this is also because we have a lot of Black people in the media too, because we are providing this change. It's not something that society is giving to us. As we saw in the documentary, they really don't care a lot. So we are doing the change in Brazil.
Julissa, go right ahead.
I remember in the movie Rosemary she talked about being kicked out of school, and you mentioned that Black girls teachers are not patient with Black children. So I was wondering, home wasn't safe, so it sounds like school was somewhere where she could escape to, and with teachers not treating her fairly. Is that a right that they do have, that teachers can just not allow students back into the classroom, or how does that work? Like, they didn't really explain how she was no longer allowed in school anymore, but she did mention that because her teachers were fed up with her, she was no longer in the classroom. So how that works in Brazil is something I was curious about.
In Brazil, in public schools, you can get kicked out, and then you need to search to a new school. And I don't know the case of Rosemary, but perhaps because of the place where she is in Rocinha, she might not have the opportunity to go to another school. But this really happens in Brazil. A lot of kids are kicked out with no explanation, or because they don't want to handle with them, and they are too messy or something like that. They give this type of information, and sometimes a lot of parents don't have the time because they have to work, and they don't have the time to put education in the first place, the kids' education. Thank you.
Any other questions for Thayná? Something that was important that I think the film brings up, and also something that we see in Quarto de Despejo, is that family extends beyond the kind of birth family that one is born into. So we saw the prominent role, some spoke about the informal education and access to education, but we saw the role of Tio Lee, and so Uncle Lee, and how he was a voice for the community, He was someone who sought to create a safe place for children. And I was just wondering if you could possibly comment on these kinds of ways that family or the kind of boundaries of family are flexible and porous, so that maybe the kind of challenges that Rosemary experienced, similar to other children in the favela, have some sort of safe place to go. So could you comment a little bit on family and what that might look like in the absence of the supports that a family could not offer because of their conditions of poverty and lack?
I think that the character of Tully and his responsibility inside of Rocinha is very reflective of how their own community take care of the children and of themselves, because we have the neighbor in the beginning too that helped Rosemary's mom during when she was a baby. And for me, I see this empathy between a lot of people that live in communities and in favelas and peripheral areas too. So in the lack of the state, as we see the Campinho, the playgrounds that Tully, Uncle Lee created, in this lack of the state's force that just go to favela to bring more violence. A lot of the leisure and the education that favelados have are created by themselves. So.
Thank you, thank you. Isabella says here, how did Quarto de Despejo challenge what is literature in Brazil? Good question. We know that the recognition of the book is recent and not very solid. What do you think that says about what we are taught to understand as knowledge and which voices should count?
The fact that, very good question. So the fact that Carolina was this Black poor woman is not nowadays, it's not very accepted by literature and this standard literature that we have in Brazil. But as I said, things are really changing in Brazil. So the effort that Black people are bringing and the Black publishers too are very important, and also the new presence of Black scholars in the universities is very important to change the scenario that we have, because it's very hard to change such a country that is based in prejudice and based on racism. So for me, is reading Quarto de Despejo was life-changing, and something that is also important is the language, because Carolina wrote a lot of things that she just had 2 years of formal access to 2 years of access to formal education. So she wrote a lot of things that people say that is grammatically wrong. And because of that, a lot of people try to say that Carolina's work is not literature. So we still have a lot to change in Brazil, but I see that nowadays Carolina is being recognized. As I said, it's a recent recognition, but I think that the fact that she was famous when she wrote and published her book, So for me, this is very, how can I say? Brazil is very complicated, and it gives the recognition. Then sometimes, then in the case of Carolina, for example, she after Quartos de Despejo, she didn't have a lot of success with her other books. So it is very complicated, the relations in Brazil and the literature and how we define it. It's very complicated to answer. I don't know if I answered the question, but
Something else to maybe build on that question is to think about the kind of wild success of Quarto de Despejo. And so you spoke about the kind of difference between literacy and there's still an issue with literacy and access to being able to read and write in Brazil. There's still some barriers and challenges there. And something that I've always questioned, and we can open this up to broader conversation. We've spoken about this text and how important it was in giving voice and giving a platform to the narrative of a poor Black woman. But I was also thinking, who were likely the readers of this text during that time? When it was released in 1963, I think, with its English translation publication, that directly, went to the United States, Europe, et cetera. But with its earlier translations in Brazilian Portuguese, does this mean that maybe those who were consuming the text initially were a part of an elite class that was just interested in kind of seeing the poverty and the stressors and the kind of destitution that Carolina speaks about in her own sort of way, embracing her reality? And so I just wondered, are there any kind of tensions with that the main consumers of her narrative at that time were consuming that doridade, the kind of Black women's pain? And is there something that might be problematic about her early success? And is that why it seemed to come very quickly and leave just as soon? But maybe we could talk about that. What are your thoughts initially?
Some of the things that you said are reflected in how curious people are about poverty when it does not affect them. So here in Brazil, on TikTok, we have a lot of videos of people getting to know favelas, and as they were going to a zoo, and I guess that when it is not, favela tourism, thank you. They go there, they see something, they pass that to another people and say, oh, favela is like this or like that. And they also have this stereotyped view, but they don't get affected by Carolina's writing or for being in a favela for one time. So I guess that some people like to see Black people suffering, and because they can't really relate to them. So it's this vision that is not close to them. So it is very easy to just go there, say some things about it, and then go back to your apartment. So
it's interesting that you mention tours, because I know for a fact that there were Hostinha tours, and there's still Hostinha tours to kind of just wander around what is a low-income neighborhood. You saw the photographs where the homes are constructed such that there's very limited space in between. Sometimes there aren't quite paved roads and you're kind of wandering and winding in between. And there are actually whole tours where people pay money to go see the internal workings of the favela, to, gain access. And it's a kind of voyeuristic turn that some have ascribed to have a, what do they call it? A kind of authentic experience in Brazil, and the authenticity is often on the backs of those who are suffering extreme poverty, state neglect, state violence, all of the things that you've mentioned. And so I think it's important to also think about how it is that these narratives work, and what might be some tensions and consequences that arise. But certainly having the stories of Black women centered moves the lens quite a bit, and provides an opportunity to see the kind of intersections of life and existence there that we wouldn't otherwise have. Are there any other questions or comments here?
I have a question for everybody. I'm very curious about how people see Brazil. And for me, it is very interesting that you have a department of Black Studies that develop these kinds of conversation with Brazilians. And I'm very thankful too. And I think that we can learn a lot from each other. And my question is, if you had a different scenario in your mind about Brazil, and that if that changes when you saw the documentary and read Carolina Maria de Jesus.
Yes, Jocelyn, and then Haley.
Okay. Yeah, so I think it definitely helped to have like that story be told directly from the person. Because I feel like that's also evidence that a lot of people don't validate in academia, like the narratives and the counter narratives and the testimonies of people. So I really did appreciate that. Like, to what you were saying, there needs to be more Black scholars telling their own stories. And even with the story of Carolina in Child of the Dark, I think the first edition, like, that was edited by like someone there. It wasn't like her own words. And they even went into discussing how there was a lot of stuff that was held back from the original, like a lot of her anger and a lot of her calling out like the government. And so there was a lot of stuff that was left out. So yeah, I do think of like how it's very important for people to tell their own stories, especially Black women, instead of leaving it up to white academics or like non-Black scholars to do that storytelling for them. So yeah, that was something that I really did appreciate, to be able to get more insight from them.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Haley, hi, what's that? Haley.
Okay, so I basically thought the same thing as Jocelyn. She touched on all the points I want to talk about, but I took a crime and politics course at UIC, and it was heavily focused on Brazil, and it touched a lot more on like I don't know, corruption and things of that sort, you know, involving like the government and how people are mistreated and forced to, you know, live under like gang control and stuff like that. But I think it definitely did give more perspective into like, you know, Black women experience instead of, you know, generalization of a population, if you get what I mean, like people living under, you know, gang control or slums, I guess.
Thank you, Kaylee. Any other perceptions of Brazil, if any, and what might have changed with your viewing and even this conversation? Well, Thayná, we are at time, but I did want to ask you if there's any final thoughts you'd like for us to leave with, given what folks have shared and how these narratives have opened a different vision for them. Do you have any final thoughts?
I'm very thankful to be here, and something that made me think a lot is about the translation of Carolina Maria de Jesus, because it's very different from the version that I have. And of course, it can't be the same because these are two different languages, but we lost a lot of Carolina in the translation. And for me, I guess that I'd like to say that I'm very thankful that you are interested in Brazil. And we Brazilians are very, you know, very kind and very, when someone wants to know more about us, we'd be very excited. And this opportunity for me was very important. And also being this Black woman that is the first of, I'm the first of my family to be at university, and I'm only 25, and I have now completed my master's degree. So for me, Rosemary and Carolina are these women that were, and this type of narratives are important for me to continue in this way, in this path that a lot of Black women had to suffer, so I could be here today. And I guess I'm very proud of these narratives, and very proud for being able to, very happy, very proud to be being able to share with you. And we talk about a transnational sharing of knowledge and of Black feminism in general. And for me, this opportunity is a way to reflect and hear about our different realities that sometimes are very, very similar. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Thayná, Professor Soares. We appreciate you and your time. Thank you so very much. So as we will return actually on Thursday, October 26th at 12:30 p.m. for Vestiges of Colonial Philosophy, Anti-Blackness, Liberalism, and Violence in Palestine. And we'll be led in our discussion by Professor Tabitha Celeste Mustafa. So thank you so much for your time. And it was so nice to see everyone, and have a great day. Thank you.